Once upon a time, no, in 2013 actually, there lived two close friends, Mr. Bin and Mr. Boo. They lived in Singapore, a city filled with marble marlines, sweating tourists, and cash. I mean, everyone knows that Singapore is now the wealthiest nation in the world, with the IMF expecting Singapore's GDP per capita to rise to some 77,000 by 2018. So, where was I? Oh yes, so there Mr. Bin and Mr. Boo live in a country home to the highest proportion of millionaires in the world. So did they both live in 7-story mansions with a zoo as a backyard and peacocks to guard the doors? Actually, only one of them, Mr. Boo, did. Unfortunately, Mr. Bin happened to belong to the 15% of Singaporean families that charity campaigns estimated to be struggling to make ends meet. An estimate only as Singapore currently has no official poverty line or definition of what makes a person poor. So whilst Mr. Boo demanded his nutritious breakfast, freshly brewed coffee matched only by a gourmet sandwich, Mr. Bin began his day greeting the early sun with an empty stomach. Whilst Mr. Boo takes the time to slowly savor his plate, taking careful sips to passing music, Mr. Bin looks again at the dwindling slips of paper in his wallet and opts instead for the cheapest bun up on the local food court. Prices have risen again. With his salary at less than 1,000 Singapore dollars a month, much like 12% of Singapore's local workforce, though significantly better than 9.2% of households that do not have a single working person, Mr. Bin works tirelessly at baggage trolleys, whilst his friend, Mr. Boo, joining the 150,000 passengers passing through Singapore's Changi Airport, book a ticket to a land Mr. Bin will never be able to reach anytime soon.
You don't see it. You don't see children with no shoes on. So it's not visible. You do notice it sometimes though, for example, when you go into McDonald's and you notice grandfathers and grandmothers working there, and sometimes people say, well, why are such old people working in a McDonald's? And I think the reason is they have to continue working because they just don't have the money.
And when the foreigners comment on how there aren't any beggars lining the streets or starving children scrounging for food, Mr. Bin finds it difficult to explain to his children why, unlike their friends at Mr. Boo's mansion, they cannot afford even the L in luxury, that they will always remain this poor, that their family will never have an equal chance, and that there is no way to make a better life when the vicious poverty cycle continues, with children unable to do better than parents due to a lack of access to knowledge and educational support. Though children might smile bravely whilst quitting school to work, but their only reward will be food on the table. Meanwhile, Mr. Boo and his friends continue to scoff at the prospect of there being such things like poverty in Singapore. Critics say the number of poor has risen over the past decade as Singapore's easy immigration policies have caused wages to stagnate at the low end whilst driving up housing costs. Now, economists are warning that Singapore, which already has some of the worst income inequality in the developed world, risks becoming increasingly polarized unless the government brings in tighter social safety nets.
It's difficult to say, but I think if you think about it and look at the economic evidence, you would have to conclude or assume that it's getting worse. Not very quickly, not dramatically, but prices are rising, and I think people's average incomes are not rising as fast. So those people at the edge who really have very little income, with the prices generally rising relatively quickly.
We see much more serious poverty problems in other countries. But even, developed countries like Singapore, such a rich country, there are still some people that are probably living in the borderline. And sometimes maybe the government try to help, but the government cannot help everybody. And then if those people that do not know the channel to find help, there's another case is that the father is looking after 5 children, and the wife is Indonesian, and the wife has difficulty to get a PR here. So the wife cannot stay here, but the father is disabled. So even if he wants to work, he cannot work.
So is there really no hope left for Mr. Bin? Absolutely not.
And then we go and knock the door by door, to see what they need. And sometimes when they open the door, we can see their condition. We will try to help them, send to the hospital, and also maybe contact the government.
Well, that's really for Singapore to decide how to change. I'm not Singaporean, so I don't vote, and I can't suggest how this government should run itself. But I think if the Singapore people think that we shouldn't really have poor people like this, maybe they'll ask the government and they'll say, well, can we provide some sort of a social security or old age pension or some sort of unemployment benefit to try and create a little bit of a social safety net?